This is The Issue, and I am the Ghetto Man. Today's issue, the United Nations. Don't go away. We'll be right back. The United Nations is actually a foreign body politic that was created in the wake of World War II in 1945. It's the love child of President Franklin D. Roosevelt. Now, Franklin D. Roosevelt was a National Socialist who, through the democratic process, attempted to nullify our constitutional republic with his communistic anti-American program called the New Deal. The name United Nations was adopted as a tribute to Roosevelt, who died a few weeks before its organization. The United Nations claims to be an organization of independent sovereign nations. The United Nations has no sovereignty of its own, whose primary purpose is to save succeeding generations from the scourge of war, which twice in our lifetime has brought untold sorrow to mankind, and to reaffirm faith in fundamental human rights, in the dignity and worth of the human person, in the equal rights of men and women, and of nations large and small, and to establish conditions under which justice and respect for the obligations arising from treaties and other sources of international law can be maintained, and to promote social progress and better standards of life in larger freedom, to practice tolerance and live together in peace with one another as good neighbors, and to unite our strength to maintain international peace and security, and to ensure, by the acceptance of principles and the institution of methods, that armed force shall not be used save in the common interest, and to employ international machinery for the promotion of economic and social advancement for all people. That comes from the preamble of the United Nations Charter, January 1st, 1945. In plain English, the United Nations claims to promote the dream of a utopian one-world order where all the nations of the world will work and live in peace and harmony. Well, that sounds pretty good to me. But the first question I ask is, who will govern this utopian New World Order? Will it be we, the people of the United States, pursuant to our Republican form of government under the mandates of the U.S. Constitution based on Christian principles? Or will it be we, the elite, pursuant to the anti-Christian United Nations Charter? Now, these two questions are extremely important and must be answered. Okay, first, how does the United Nations operate? Well, the three principal organs of the United Nations are, first, a General Assembly, where questions and matters within the scope of the United Nations Charter are discussed. Second, the Security Council. Its primary responsibility is for the maintenance of international peace. And third, an Economic and Social Council, which makes or initiates studies and reports with respect to international economic, social, cultural, educational, and health. The decision-making process of each organ is accomplished by a vote. Now, it's important to note that none of the members of the General Assembly, Security Council, or any other council for that matter, are elected by we, the people of the United States of America. The election process is closed to the citizens of the United States. Very few people in the United States even know who the President of the United Nations is, let alone how he was elected into office. Do you know who the President of the United Nations is? Did you vote for him or her? Unlike our constitutional republic, where public servants are elected and answer directly to we the people, the United Nations officials are elected by and answer to its members only. Now, the Security Council is composed of 15 members. 5 of its members are permanent: China, France, Russia, and the United Kingdom, and of course the United States. And 10 non-permanent members are elected for 2-year terms by the General Assembly. Now, it's interesting to note that one of the 5 permanent members of the Security Council is China. And China is well known for its brutality. Remember the brutal massacre of the students in Tiananmen Square in Beijing, China? In my opinion, the vote of the United Nations Security Council represents the vilest forms of government in the world today, which include, but are not limited to, communism, socialism, dictatorships, and of course, the vilest form of government there is, democracy. You see, liberty, rights, justice, property, and freedom, things that we Americans hold close to our hearts, lose their true meaning in the company of the United Nations Security Council. Do you think for 1 minute that the word liberty has the same meaning in China as it does in the United States? Do you really think that the words property and freedom have the same meaning in Cuba as it does in the United States? What we Americans fail to recognize is that the function of the United Nations is not based on the visions of our nation's founding fathers or the principles found in our Constitution and the Bill of Rights. Instead, they are based upon the homogenized ideals and visions of the United Nations founders, who look upon individual national sovereignty and freedom as the law of the jungle. National sovereignty is a threat to the United Nations' perverted definition of world peace. The United Nations' definition of world peace, when you take a close look at it, actually means world dominance and control. It is through the pretended authority of the United Nations Security Council that all, and I mean all the countries of the world, whether they're members of the United Nations or not, are forced to comply with what it dictates or be destroyed. Simple as that. The inalienable rights that we Americans are guaranteed and that are protected by the United States Constitution do not exist in the United Nations Charter. Now, inalienable rights are rights created by God, or nature if you prefer, and cannot be surrendered without the consent of the one possessing such rights. Also, when I use the word God, I'm referring to the God of our fathers, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, Yahweh. Now, under the United Nations Charter, our inalienable rights are substituted by human rights. Now, human rights are the creation of man, subject to man's will, interpretation, and application, and can be suspended and or revoked at the pleasure of civil government. Human rights are not founded upon Christian principles. The United Nations is an anti-Christian organization with an anti-Christian agenda. Now, we Americans, we've been taught that the United States Constitution contains the best system of government in the world. We are continually told that we are the freest and most just nation in the world. Now, if this is true, why do we need the United Nations and its charter to secure world peace? Couldn't we use the United States Constitution instead? Why not invite all the nations of the world to join our republic and become a state or a U.S. territory within our union? Wouldn't this establish world peace? Can you imagine all the nations of the world under the protection of the United States Constitution? If the United States Constitution represents the most just form of government in the world, why haven't the principles found in our law been adopted worldwide? What does the United Nations Charter have to offer the people of the world that the United States Constitution could not fulfill? Is the form of government contained in the United Nations Charter superior to the United States Constitution? And if so, in what way? Are you willing to surrender the United States of America to the United Nations? Are you willing to place the American people under the control of the United Nations Charter and its unelected members. Do you want the United Nations Security Council imposing its will on the United States of America? Every country on the planet, including the United States, is now subject to the United Nations Charter and the Security Council. The Constitution of the United States is nothing more than a doormat for Congress to wipe its feet on before they begin each session. Our nation's flag now flies under the United Nations flag. Only a conquered nation would fly its flag under its conqueror. Yes, the United States of America is a conquered nation. It was conquered from within, and it was done without firing a shot. Today, the United Nations controls the world. If a nation, whether that nation is a member of the United Nations or not, refuses to comply with the will of the Security Council, that nation will be forced to comply. You better believe it. And what they usually do is they force the country to comply in two ways. One, by sanctions, and two, by war. Now, sanctions are usually imposed in two ways. One, economically, and or two, trade embargoes. If a nation refuses to obey the mandates of the Security Council, the first step in compliance is to freeze the nation's assets abroad and cut off its trade, i.e. food and fuel supply. And if sanctions fail, then military force is applied. Okay, where does the United Nations get its power? Well, it gets its power from its member nations who must, pursuant to the treaty with the United Nations, and of course the laws of their land, commit its war-making capabilities to the United Nations and its goals. Why? Simple. Because the United Nations has no war-making capabilities of its own. It has no army, it has no navy, it has no air force. In other words, each of the United Nations member states must independently, according to their own national laws, declare war against the targeted country. Now, as citizens of the United States, we have a strong interest in the actions of our public servants. We elect them into public office to represent us pursuant to the mandates of the United States Constitution only. Now, in the event that our nation is to become engaged in war with a foreign country, it must be done in the strictest sense according to the laws of our land, not pursuant to the laws of a foreign body politic. The United Nations Charter falls under the treaty clause of Article 6 of the United States Constitution, which reads as follows. This Constitution and the laws of the United States which shall be made pursuant thereof, and all treaties made or which shall be made under the authority of the United States shall be the supreme law of the land. Article 6, United States Constitution. Now, it's believed by some people that the clause, quote, all treaties made or which shall be made under the authority of the United States shall be the supreme law of the land, allows a treaty to supersede the Constitution of the United States. Well, this analogy is incorrect and has been addressed by the United States Supreme Court on many occasions as follows. Quote, there is nothing in this language which intimates that treaties and laws enacted pursuant to them do not have to comply with the provisions of the Constitution. Nor is there anything in the debates which accompanied the drafting and ratification of the Constitution which even suggest such a result. It would be manifestly contrary to the objections of those who created the Constitution, as well as those who are responsible for the Bill of Rights, let alone alien to our entire constitutional history and tradition, to construe Article 6 as permitting the United States to exercise power under an international agreement. In this case, we're talking about the United Nations Charter without observing constitutional prohibitions. In effect, such construction would permit an amendment of that document in a manner not sanctioned by Article 5. The prohibitions of the Constitution were designed to apply to all branches of national government, and they cannot be nullified by the executive or by the executive and Senate combined. And it comes from a case called Reed versus Covert, 354 U.S. 1, if you want to look it up. The Constitution of the United States does not grant Congress any authority to place its lawmaking powers in the hands of any other branch of government, nor does it permit Congress to delegate that power to a governing body that has been created pursuant to the Treaty Clause of Article 6 of the United States Constitution. Do you want the United Nations and the Security Council imposing its will on the United States of America? Well, I sure don't. Today, our public servants are unlawfully delegating the sovereignty of the United States of America and the American people over to the United Nations and its charter. And they're doing it without any opposition from we the people. Now, this is exactly what the King of England was doing to the colonists prior to the American Revolution. And the fact is clearly contained in the Declaration of Independence, where it states, quote, "He has combined with others to subject us to a jurisdiction foreign to our Constitution, and unacknowledged by our laws, giving his assent to their acts of pretended legislation." Declaration of Independence, July 4th, 1776. The United Nations Charter is a jurisdiction foreign to our Constitution. Our public servants have unlawfully given their assent to the United Nations acts of pretended legislation. Think about that for a second. How long are you going to let this situation continue to exist? How long before it's too late? All, and I mean all of our public servants, state and federal, and this includes members of Congress and the President, have sworn an oath to uphold and defend the Constitution of the United States. Why then are we allowing our public servants to violate their oath to we the people and this nation? There is nothing in our constitutions, state and federal, that allows any public servant to take an oath to uphold and defend the United Nations Charter. As the Supreme Court of the United States ruled in Reed versus Covert, quote, "The prohibitions of the Constitution were designed to apply to all branches of national government and cannot be nullified by the executive or by the executive and Senate combined." You see, the United Nations is nothing more than a paper tiger. It has no authority over anybody or anything, period. I am the Ghetto Man. If you're politically correct, then you're legally wrong. And if you're not part of the solution, then you are the problem. Thank you for watching. Please subscribe to my BitChute channel and please share.